Good afternoon everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Video today is another one of our food prep, preserving, meal planning and all that sort of thing after our grocery haul. So my little spiel here that people can skip or listen to as they desire. We, as I said, family of 8 who live off-grid, and the way we do our food is to shop every 6 weeks, about 3.5–4 hours away. By doing this, I have access to Costco, a fruit and veg shop where I have a really good relationship with the owner, a butcher, Coles, Woolworths, Aldi, Kmart, Bunnings, and all that all in one place. And I'm lucky enough that my mother lives in Brisbane, so I can stay with her while I'm doing it. So there's no cost of, accommodation or anything to do that as well. So we do this because it saves us money. We used to shop fortnightly when we first moved out here in Toowoomba, which is about an hour and a half away, and then we dragged that out a little bit further, but it wasn't working because we couldn't get enough for our budget to last us longer by going to Toowoomba. So then there was discussion about going to Costco as well, which was like an extra hour down the mountain, but doing that all in one day was a little bit prohibitive. So anyway, this is what we do now. So we shop about every 6 weeks. There will be a couple of 4-week spans in the lead up to Christmas, just to get timing right, to have shopping trips before Christmas. And I spend a couple of days down there to do the trip, and I do everything all at once. So it's a supply run as well as food. So it's a trip to Bunnings and that sort of thing as well. Sometimes there's school supplies that are required. Interrupted by children. What was I saying? So it's a supply run as well as food. We do other things. So I do school supplies or, seasonal change of clothing. In summer I tend to go and buy a couple $100 worth of shorts and shirts for the 6 kids to use over the summer and get rid of anything that needs to be gotten rid of. In winter we do winter pajamas, things like that. I also do a Bunnings run. Darryl will go to Bunnings in Toowoomba in between the 6 weeks if needed. But I generally, while I'm in Brisbane, will do a Bunnings run as well to get whatever it is that we need there. And I always surf Marketplace before I go down there or while I'm there, just to make sure there's nothing worthwhile to collect as well. And I tend to organise something. So like this month I bought barrels and stuff for using for our wicking beds and watering, gravity-fed watering and things like that. So I will try and do that at the same time and take the trailer if I need to. Get it all done at once. This way it's going to save us money in transport costs and things like that. So, post the 6-week grocery haul, everyone was curious as to what I did with food and how I made it last for the 6 weeks. Most common question is, how do you make the fruit and veg last for 6 weeks? Well, we don't. You cannot keep fresh vegetables for that long. You can keep cabbages. We keep cabbages quite well for 6 weeks. Carrots, generally speaking, potatoes, apples and oranges can, if they're stored correctly, last for the 6 weeks as well. Nearly everything else has to be processed in a manner for it to be edible for the 6 weeks and beyond that. So I tend to buy in bulk if I can. This month I bought 24 kilos of strawberries, I think. So I buy in bulk when it's seasonally available and cheap, and we process it to make it last for the period of time and hopefully beyond that as well. So because I used to get all those questions, we started doing these videos. I was doing them daily and that really didn't work. So now I'm doing them every couple of days after every grocery trip, and I let you see into my kitchen and see what I'm doing with the food. And I try and do some what we eat in a weeks as well. I don't always get them done, but I do try. And the rest of the time you just get to see what I do with all the products that we have bought and how we make it work for the 6 weeks and things like that. So this is part, I'm going to say 3 of the September grocery haul, and I have my notes because I record over my bench for a couple of days and then I sit there and I type out all my notes looking at the footage, and then I come out here and I do the voiceover, and then I link it all up with the footage tonight to put out tomorrow. So this is part 3, I believe, for September, and there's normally 7 parts maybe so it's normally 10 to 14 days ish of prep and stuff that needs to be done after each grocery haul to make sure that all the food is used appropriately. So anyway, this is part 3, so enjoy, and thanks for watching. Alright, so on the previous video I had made the sweet chili sauce, but it had gotten really late, so what I'd done is I'd just put the lid on it and left it. In Our kitchen, it gets down below 0 overnight at the moment, so it means that I can put the lid on something, leave it sitting on the stove, and then come back in the morning and just bring it back up to temperature to keep on going. In summer, I obviously can't do that. It either needs to be put in the fridge or it needs to be done in the same day, which is fine because generally speaking, it's still daylight till like 9 p.m. So, you know. So I didn't get the sweet chili sauce finished, so what I've done is first thing in the morning is I've come out and I've put it back on the stove to be brought up to a simmer so that I can then can it. It had already thickened to where I wanted it, which is why it cooked all day, but I hadn't had a chance to finish doing it because I'd wanted it to reduce down to be the right texture. So it was already where I wanted it to be, gelatinous and kind of sticky, but I just hadn't had time to can it, so I've put it on the burner, turned it on so that it will bring it back up to temperature before I put it in jars. This is what the strawberry mixed fruit cordial looked like that I made yesterday. So this is the strawberry lemonade concentrate, kind of. It's our version of it. I dilute it before I can it because that's just more convenient for me, and I added mango and passion fruit. So it's sort of a mixed fruit cordial realistically for us, and that's the way we like it. So this is what it looked like. It's quite thick. Darryl is getting used to some texture in his cordials, which is kind of nice. And it's all sealed, ready for the shelves. We have a lot of eggs at the moment. I showed that in the day in the life, that we have baskets of eggs all over the benches at the moment. So I threw together a Dutch baby pancake for breakfast today. These use up a lot of eggs, and if all of us are home, I can cook 2 and we'll eat 2 of them. So each tray takes 18 eggs. So I do 18 eggs, 350 grams of flour and 600 grams of milk into the Thermomix. Blitz it up. We want lots of air. We want it nice and bubbly. I do have this up on the website, so I'll put the link to the website in for this recipe. As I keep on adding things to the website, the hope is that as I'm making these on the video, I can put a link to each recipe in the description and potentially have videos for them, and they can all link backwards and forwards, but it's a work in progress. So it's 18 eggs, 350 grams of flour, 600 grams of milk in the Thermomix, blitzed all up, scrape down, blitz again. You want lots of air, nice and frothy. Heat up a cast iron pan with ghee in the bottom or butter or whatever you're using. So a well-oiled pan already hot, and you pour the batter into the hot fat straight into the pan and then cook it at a fairly high temperature until it's set in the middle. And then that's all it takes. So it's a really quick thing to throw together, which uses up lots of eggs. And it's a really nice base for a lot of other things. It doesn't have much flavour on its own. With the strawberry juice, I had steamed juice the day before. I decided to make pancake syrup. So while I was, making Dutch babies, that made sense. So I measured out how many cups of juice I had into a pot and put equal amounts of sugar in there. This is one of the very few cases that I do 1-to-1 sugar content to the juice, because you want it syrupy and strong because you're not going to use a whole lot of it. So you're just going to drizzle it over whatever it is that you're having, whether it's, it's really nice over ice cream or pancakes or anything like that. So it's nice with whole fruit as well, but you can make the syrup with whole, crushed strawberries is really nice as well. But because I had this juice and I was making pancakes, it's just what I thought of. After I'd already made this, Kathy from Little Gardens Big Dreams had suggested I make jelly with it. And I had thought about making jelly with it, but the thing is that it just would have all been eaten in one go. 2 litres of jelly wouldn't have lasted very long with my lot, 2 meals maybe. And she also suggested making a flummery with the cream, whipping it up with the gelatin and making the cream with it, which would have been really nice too. Or you could have made a standard jelly, like a American jelly jam type thing. But because I was making pancakes, I just decided to do this, though I will have to try that flummery at some point because that sounds delish. So I pour out the sugar and the juice up to a simmer to make sure that the sugar's dissolved well. You want to make sure it's well dissolved, otherwise you'll get crystallization in your jars, which is never pleasant. So simmer it, make sure the sugar is really well dissolved, and then you can can it. Once I served up the Dutch baby, we actually ladled a little bit of that strawberry syrup that was still hot on the stove over the top to try it out. Very tasty, very sweet, but that's to be expected. I always compare the Dutch babies to a baked custard. They're a similar consistency, and they don't have a great deal of flavour on their own, but they have this lovely creamy filling texture, and adding that little bit of sweetness over the top. They're great with maple syrup, but I don't always buy maple syrup because it's expensive. So maple syrup's $20 a litre, and this strawberry syrup was almost free. Because say it was 8 cups of juice, 8 cups of sugar, so we're talking maybe 2 kilos of sugar, which is $3 to make it all, because the strawberry juice was basically free because it was using the offcuts of the strawberries. So it's a good way to use it. And as much as maple syrup has minerals and all that sort of stuff in it. It's still just liquid sugar, so, you know. After breakfast, I got the now hot sweet chili sauce into jars. So I wasn't sure what size jars I really wanted for this. I wanted some sort of sauce jars would have been preferable, but I actually find sauce jars with narrow necks kind of inconvenient. They're very hard to clean, and to make sure you get all the sauce out of them. Like, the kids would end up putting them on the sink with still a fair bit of sauce in them because you can't, like, spatula them out or anything. So sometimes they're not the greatest choice either. They'd look nice though. So I just used a bunch of mixed supermarket jars. I just pulled a bunch of the shelves that all had 63mm openings so that I could use all the same size lid for them, just to make it nice and easy. So there was a mix of, I think, tomato paste jars, there was some molasses jars, maybe some jam jars, just anything that had a 63mm lid, and they ranged from around about 375ml to 500ml. With the amount of sugar and vinegar in the sauce, so long as no one is contaminating it by, like, putting a spoon with something else on it in the jar, it's going to last a couple of weeks in the fridge after opening anyway, so I'm not overly concerned about it. The size of the jar, these jars should be fine. I'm sure we'll get through them. I may gift a couple of the jars too, because we did end up making quite a lot of it in the end, but I do think that we will enjoy using it for a bunch of things. I may have to make some spring rolls this month to try with it, because it's a really thick dipping consistency. It reminds me of the little tubs that you get when you order Chinese food with the spring rolls and stuff, and I've been researching making the spring roll wrappers from scratch, so I may have to do that at some point this month. I used the filling tool that a friend bought me for my birthday, which works really well for sticky things like this. It definitely reduces the mess on the mouths of the jars and the drippage, but I still, of course, cleaned all the rims really well with white vinegar before putting the lids on, because any sort of dripping can make an issue if the lid hasn't got good contact with the top of the jars. So good clean with white vinegar before putting the lids on, and then put the lids on nice and firm. Lug lid jars, the lids go on nice and firm. Now, because I didn't use the taller jars, I could use my actual steam canner for this batch. I've been using my pressure canner for my steam canning because the passata jars don't fit in the steam canner, but all these jars fit in the steam canner. So I put the base in and filled with the water just up to just under the rack. Warmed the water up because the sauce is warm, so you want the water warm. Put all the jars in there and then put the lid on and made sure that the lid had contact all the way around with the quantity of jars in there, and turned it on. The difference between an actual steam canner and using the pressure canner for steam canning is that there is a gauge on the steam canner. So instead of just using the fact that the pressure canner is shooting steam and that the steam valve pops up, you're using a gauge on a steam canner. There is two different settings on it. There's a light green and a dark green. For my altitude, I have to use the dark green. So I need to get the gauge all the way up into the dark green. And once it's in the dark green, then you start your processing time. So these sauces, jams, and these sorts of things, they generally only need a 10-minute canning time for under 1,000 feet. Altitude, we're over 1,000 feet, so we use 15 minutes. So I just started a timer for 15 minutes once it was in that dark green spot. While the sauce was processing, I got the syrup into the jars. So I have these little jars which are perfect for syrups like this because it limits portions. The kids and Darryl and I will go through pretty much a whole jar and a serve of pancakes or something like that. But if there was more on offer, like if it was a larger jar, I'm sure they'd use more. So having it in the smaller jars makes them think about the quantity they're using better, because they want to make sure everybody gets some. Or I feel like it does anyway. Who knows? These little jars are about 250ml, so which means about 30ml each, which is a plenty, sort of a generous drizzle over whatever you're eating without overdoing it. Though, if needed, a second jar will be opened. They're a good little jar for this anyway. I bought them for something, I can't even remember what, and there hasn't been a huge amount of uses for them. This is a good use for them. I cleaned the rims well with white vinegar as per usual. Again, this is a sugar syrup, so you don't want anything sticky, and then I screwed the lids on firmly. About then, the sweet chili was ready to come out of the canner, so I got all of those out of there and onto the board, and then I topped up the water in the canner back up to the rack. This probably wasn't necessary for just a second 15-minute processing time. Steam canners have a maximum canning time of, like, I think it's 40 minutes or 45 minutes, because that's the amount of water that they can hold. They don't hold enough water to process for any longer. 2 15-minute lots is probably fine, running after the other, but at the same time the water in there is boiling and the jars are hot but not boiling, so by adding a little bit of cold water to that hot water, that boiling water in there, then you're going to bring the temperature down a little bit, which is a good thing too. So I topped up the water put the syrup jars in there, and then process those. Same process. Brought the counter up to the dark green mark and started the timer for 15 minutes. After they were done, I pulled them out onto the same board to sit for 24 hours as well, because as I say all the time, the 24-hour rest period is part of the processing process as well. That 24 hours is required before you check seals. Sometimes it doesn't look like they've sealed when you first pull them out, but by the end of the 24 hours they have sealed. So you need to leave them for that 24 hours and then check. I also, after the 24 hours, I clean the jars, label if necessary, and get them on the shelves. The white sort of marks on the jars is just from the water and the aluminium in the steam counter and stuff like that. The hard water and the aluminium steam counter, it just wipes off, but it's on the outside of the jar, so it doesn't really matter anyway. The last thing for the day I decided to make was pepper jelly. So this isn't something I've made before, but it comes highly recommended as something to use on a platter, like with cheese and biscuits and things like that. And in summer, if our tomatoes do well, and if we've got basil and things like that, we do that a lot in summer. We have just plates with sourdough crackers. I generally make sourdough crackers a lot, but I will also buy crackers in summer as well, because keeping up with making them is not that easy. So the kids really like rice crackers, and there's a couple of home brand, like Coles brand and that, biscuits that Darryl and I don't mind, that I will probably start buying as we come into summer, because when we've got tomatoes coming out of the garden, that's one of our favourite things. Tomatoes, pesto, things like that with crackers. So I'm gonna give it a go. I'm sure I've got some friends who would appreciate a jar or two as well. I'm sure they just, struggle to have to get gifted some pepper jelly. I used the low methyl ester pectin again. I didn't really reduce the sugar a whole lot with this. You can with this style of pectin, but for this particular recipe, I didn't, because it's not going to work. But I didn't have any standard pectin to use anyway, so I used the low methyl ester pectin anyway. The style of this jelly kind of means that you need that high quantity of sugar though, because you're making a syrup with the peppers suspended and then gelling it into a jelly. Unlike other jellies where the jams where the liquid is like fruit juice and stuff, this is basically just vinegar. So you need the sugar to cut the heat and make it a jam. So with that, without the higher amount of sugar, it just wouldn't be pleasant to consume. So it still needs a significant amount of sugar. I don't know whether there is ones that have higher amounts of sugar than what I'm using, whether this is still lower than some, but this is what I decided to go with by using the Pomona's pectin. Is a low methyl ester pectin that's used in America a lot. I buy the Green Living Australia brand because it's cheaper, but Pomona's pectin has a website that has like sheets of how to design your own jellies and jams and fruit syrups and stuff, and gives you ratios for things. So I did this based on that, and this is what I decided was the right amount for what we were doing. So I used my little chopper thing to cut up the peppers and the chilies. It's I can't remember what they're called, the little green lid thing, and you push it down and it chops stuff. You can see me using it. I wanted neat little dices, so I started hand cutting it, but it just didn't work, and I didn't want it done in the Thermomix because I didn't want it minced. I wanted little dice pieces because it's going to be suspended in the jelly, so I wanted it to look nice. So I used the cutter thing to dice it all up. It works really well with things like this. I've used it before when I was making cowboy candy and I was gifting it, so I wanted the little dices rather than it minced up in the Thermomix. Now I just minced it up in the Thermomix, but it does make for good presentation. So I did about 4.5 cups of the peppers and the chili mix. I used red peppers or capsicums, as well as yellow, as well as some of the hot chilies, all together in these neat little tiny dices, filled for about 4.5 cups worth. I then mixed it with 4 cups of apple cider vinegar, put it on the stove, brought it to the boil, and then turn it down to a simmer for about 5 minutes. You want to let some of that peppers soften, but you also want the juices to come out of it a bit to flavour that syrup too. Now, vinegar has the ability to acidify 3 times its amount, so 4 cups of vinegar to 4.5 cups of peppers and stuff is plenty, no matter what percentage vinegar you're using here. I put it on, so once it had been simmering for 5 minutes, I added the 6 teaspoons of the calcium water. So calcium water is required for low methyl ester pectin to help it to gel because it's using less sugar. It's part and parcel of the way that this works. So I added 6 teaspoons of the calcium water to the vinegar and peppers mix. I added 4.5 teaspoons of the pectin to 1 cup of sugar and mixed it well. So we're going to mix the pectin through the sugar. You do this with standard pectin as well. The best way to get it to disperse through the liquid is to mix it through your sweetener. So I mixed the 4.5 teaspoons of pectin to the 1 cup of sugar, mixed it well, brought the vinegar mix back up to a boil to add the sugar and pectin mix. So then once I brought it up to a boil, I poured the sugar and pectin mix in slowly and whisked it really well. You want to stir it really vigorously while you've added that pectin because you want that pectin to disperse. If you don't, it will just gel into balls. So you want it to be spread out through that liquid with that sugar. Once it was mixed in vigorously, everything was dissolved and well blended, I added the other 5 cups of sugar. So I used 6 cups of sugar in total for this jam. And mixed the rest of the sugar in until it was all dissolved as well. I then filled my jars with jelly. I used the filling tool again, but it was a little awkward. Those little dices of the peppers were a little larger than the hole in like a little larger than it liked. They did fit through it, but you had to sort of you had to press the lever a few times to get it to sort of shove some through if it got a little backed up. And by using that movement, my hands didn't tolerate it very well. Holding it up at that height and then pushing the lever over and over again, it's a spring-loaded lever, was not doing me any favours. So Darryl helped me with these once I couldn't do it anymore. I was just going to move to ladling, but he did it for me. So he helped me fill those jars. So the tool is great for keeping the rims clean. It's better for things that don't have solid chunks in them, though. I reused the pesto jars that we get from Aldi. We go through quite a lot of these. I believe they're 270 ml. The plan is to try and make enough of our own pesto to fill them and freeze them eventually. But for the moment, we use them for things that 270 ml is a good amount. So I used these a lot for the cowboy candy too. And it's going to work well for this pepper jelly. So, because we're not going to eat it in huge amounts. Like if it's used as a little dollop over cheese and crackers and stuff, you're not going to be eating huge amounts of it. I wouldn't think. We never know. Some of these things that I put into small jars, I always regret having used small jars because all of a sudden we're going through 3 small jars in one sitting instead of just 1. But anyway. It'd be good for gifting too, these little jars, especially for people who aren't sure whether they're going to like it. And that's the whole thing. It's an odd sort of a concept for, I know that it's fairly common in America, I think, because that's where I've seen it everywhere. But for us, it's a little bit of an odd concept. So it'll be good small ones for gifting. Though I will have to, remove the labels on the ones that I'm gifting because I'm pretty slack with removing labels off my jars. So I filled all the jars, I cleaned the rims well with white vinegar as per usual, and then placed the lids on. Lug lids, so they have to be done firmly. I use a mix of brand new and secondhand lids. It just depends on the quality of them and how many I have and what I'm canning and that sort of thing. The steam canner got topped up once more and put on the stove to run. Same process. Jars in, taken to the dark green section of the gauge, and then timer started for 15 minutes. After they were done, I pulled them out of the canner and put them onto a board for 24 hours as always, because that is just part and parcel of processing anything. I do keep on forgetting to mention, and I will do a post over on Instagram and keep showing it off here, but I got this gorgeous single slab board from Running Amok Off-Grid. I had contacted them asking if they did a single slab because I have some cheap boards that I really love, but because they're cheap they have joins and food and stuff gets caught in them. I'm careful to sanitize them, and I try to keep them well oiled and all that, but it's an issue for me to have those joins in the boards and know that things can get stuck in them and that the children aren't as vigilant about cleaning them as I am. So, and because the kids sometimes submerge them in water, which I don't do, then they can get warped and those joints can open up a little bit more and things like that. And it's really just not the greatest thing ever. So I'd really like a collection of single slab boards so that I know that there's nothing that can be in there. Once I oil them, clean them, sanitize them, they are clean. There's no little gaps for things to get stuck in. So I contacted Running Amok Off-Grid because I saw them advertising that they did boards and asked them if they did single slab, and they do, and so they sent me one. I paid for it, but I got a discount. But I wanted to share it with you guys as well, because if you're looking to support someone local for this sort of thing, then that'd be great. But it's a gorgeous board. It's got feet on it, which really helps too, because sometimes the biggest problem is your bench gets wet and then your board's sitting in the water and it warps because of that. So that's no great good. So having the feet on it is great too. Very solid board, very happy with it. And I will put a link to their Insta or something in the description. And I will get some good photos of it to share too, because I really like it. I just keep on forgetting to mention it. So that was it for that day. I'm only doing one day in this because there was like 3 different canning projects, and it's enough for one sort of video worth of, you know, sharing. So that was part 3, I think, of September's food prep planning, preserving, all that sort of stuff. And I will see you on the next one. Thanks, guys.